Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I wanted to bless you not just with a build guide, but with a template for how to scale both survivability and elemental damage at the same time. And if you follow this template and implement it on your own character, you'll have a lot of flexibility to run quite a large variety of elemental damage based builds. And I'll showcase for you one use case of that I've come up with. I also have one more lined up for perhaps next week's build guide, but you can pretty much run anything that's elemental damage based. The one thing that I did notice though is that the mage skills don't scale particularly well with elemental damage. The scale damage numbers are just superior in most cases. The things that do seem to scale well with elemental damage are ancestral strike effects. I noticed a lot of them having pretty large numbers like 100%, 200%, 300% elemental damage per proc, with the ability to proc them quite reliably. And maybe some proc effects inside the mage skill tree as well. But the mage skills themselves seemed a little bit lackluster to me. Some of them you can make work, but you might have superior options elsewhere. And as you can see in the background, we're running on Netherworld, and most of our damage comes from these fireballs that rotate around us. But every now and then we use our skills. If you really wanted to, you could make this build into a pure zero button build. All you need to do is just navigate with your WASD, and you really don't need to cast any skills once you optimize it fully around that fireball damage. So this setup has a ton of flexibility. Let me show you how you can set this up for yourself as well. Irashimasu! Alright, so let me show you what the concept of the build is. As you can see, we're running 750k life right now, and we can probably push that to 1 million or so. I can definitely optimize the gear a lot better. I am running a bunch of purple items at this point, and they're crazy OP, but I still have 3 slots that are not fully optimized around nether items. And so the build revolves around stacking life and leveraging the ancestral skill tree, and particularly this node right here. 25% of your missing life you gain as elemental damage. There's also this node that gives you elemental damage as a function of your max life. So together they work extraordinarily well. However, this node, Elemental Pact, actually scales with elemental damage multipliers, whereas this one does not. So you remember this number 119 versus 94. If we go to our skill tree or our character sheet, you can see the elemental damage added flat, that gets multiplied by the added percentile and by the other multipliers. And if we just quickly scale this point right here, 119 extra elemental damage, and go back, you can see that gained from conversions is a flat 119. It does not get scaled up. So I'm not sure if this is intended or not. I'm not sure if this is considered to be a conversion or not. There's another node down here that gives you elemental damage as a function of your evasion. So that is something else that actually works in the exact same way as the gain up from conversion. So that's a separate conversion. It just seems like this may be unintentional that it gets scaled up, but at this point in time, whatever it is, intentional or not, it does get multiplied by additive and multiplicative damage. So we're going to take advantage of it. And even if it didn't, lining up these 2 skill nodes gives you so much elemental damage, it can be incredibly build opening and build defining. So that is how we get most of our elemental damage, is this node in particular with scalars, multiplicative of all sorts, and potentially this one as well if you choose to go through this route, and then you can just link up here like this. So that's one way to run the build, is to just path this way. The other way is to just use your, I don't know, first stone, fancy ancestral stone, and just allocate to this one. And then the rest is just deciding what elemental damage you're going to take advantage of. And before we get into that, let me just show you the other neat thing about the build, is if you run this legendary effect right here, you get 300,000 evasion, or even higher, depending on your missing life. So yeah, 81% of your missing life becomes evasion. And as you can see, with sub-optimized everything right now, we're getting 95% evasion. This is incredibly powerful. This setup gives you both great survivability and great damage. So this kind of template, just this pathing right here, you can use to do a lot with. Or the other option that you can consider is what we were running, and that is stacking burns and then 7 times max burns with Loi's Gratitude, and also making sure fireballs apply 3 stacks of burn instead of 1. So that's the pathing to do what we were currently doing with burns and fireballs. With this setup, if you click on this, it will tell you the damage per burn. So you can see it's 1.7 million damage per burn. We can apply 7 of them, so that scales up quite nicely. If you choose to use this setup, you get 1 giga burn because you're able to seal even more of your life. And so that 1 giga burn is going to be 4.2 million damage. So it is worth maybe 2.5 of the other weaker burns, but in the other setup, we can stack up to 7. So it does seem like the other setup can deliver more. However, this is just a more universal setup because you can pivot any way you want. You can just take this out, and rather than relying on Loi's Gratitude, you can rely on many other setups. And yeah, this would be the setup that I would recommend. Not only that, but you also get a 50% more damage multiplier on your primary and secondary skills. So this gives you so much flexibility on what you want to run. But anyway, regardless of what you choose for your fireballs and burn setup, those are 2 different options of the Ancestral Tree that I can recommend. Next, let's go to the itemization. For your staff, you want to go with max life and max life multiplier. So that's the Holy Benediction staff. Can't even consider anything else. This is how we get to 750k life. Next, if you're running Loi's Gratitude, you want to have at least 50% aura effect. If you don't have 50% aura effect, this 0.5 seconds is 1 second at 10 points here. So getting 50% aura effect fixes that and gives you just a lot more fireballs. So anything over 50% aura increased effect does nothing for the build. All 3 of these auras don't scale beyond 50% aura effect. So unless you're running some other aura, don't bother going anywhere above 50% aura effect. And that can be achieved if you're running pure stats. That's just like 2 pure slots. You can see 27.93 here and another 27 here. So that's way over 50% already. That is sufficient. I am running way more aura effect than I need. That's because this is the setup I was using for a different build. And we were going super heavy on the auras. Eventually, we pivoted multiple times to get to the point where we are today. So I just have remnants of items that I was using for something else. Like I said, this is not a fully optimized item setup and affix setup whatsoever. So I'm going to walk you through how you can optimize it further and get a lot more damage out of it. For example, area increased effect and area increased size. You don't really need these if you're solely relying on Loi's Gratitude. You can just drop these down to 0. I'm running them again because I was running something else previously, and they actually help my primary and secondary skills, which again, if you're relying on Loi's Gratitude and trying to do a 0 button build, you don't need. One more thing I would mention is if you spec away from area effect and aura effect, I would recommend putting a bunch into damage over time. So you see right now I have only 105%. You can scale this up quite a bit more, and this is just a solid more damage multiplier for your fireball burn damage. We're also running gloves that gives us DoT crit and ancestral strike, so you can benefit from getting 100% crit and 100% ancestral strike. That's a huge damage boost. If you're going for a 0 button build, attack speed and cooldown become irrelevant. So that's another major benefit of only running Loi's Gratitude. You don't need any mana, you don't need any mana regen, none of these are necessary. You don't need armor, you don't need elemental res, you don't need evasion. As I mentioned, this 460k evasion that gives us 97% dodge, that is all coming from this legendary affix, and it is a conversion. So you can see it does not benefit from added percent, it does not benefit from evasion multipliers. So don't bother getting evasion. All you need is this legendary affix. Easy life. Obviously don't bother with raw damage or Reaper damage. Don't need any of that. Some percent added elemental damage can be beneficial, but I wouldn't consider running flat elemental damage. We just get so much flat already from the Ancestral skill tree that we don't need flat elemental damage. Crit strike damage and ancestral strike damage, I think, are quite valuable because of the gloves. So those are good damage multipliers and scalars that you can run. Shadow res at 100% and tenacity at 100% ideally is what I would run. The damage reduction stuff is probably unnecessary. We just have so much HP and a lot of recovery on ancestral strikes that we probably don't need it. Now that we've gone over a lot of the high value affixes that you want to run, let's quickly take a look at the mandatory legendary affixes for the build. Number one most mandatory is this chest affix, Immense Vitality. That gives you 50% life lock. Without 50% life lock, we just cannot make the build work. It also gives you 50% max life multiplier, so this is a must-have on the build. Don't even bother trying to run this build without having this legendary affix. So this is another legendary chest affix here, the one that converts your missing life into evasion. So unless you're running nether items, you cannot slot this. You also want this max life multiplier on the helmet legendary affix. That's the best in slot for the build. And if you're running burn, I strongly recommend damage over time. We're running giving you crits and ancestral strike damage. This is just a superb damage scaling. The added elemental damage also scales by this % more elemental damage multiplier, so try and get that on your bracer. But this is definitely not as important as some of the other affixes. And then we have some good quality of life ones like 28% move speed multiplier. This is great for a 0-button build that destroys everything in seconds, and so you can just run the fastest possible Netherworld maps. Skills costing life instead of mana is a nice addition if you're considering to actually use your primary and secondary skills. And then +1 rank to ancestral gifts. This is not the most useful, and depending on how you skill your ancestral tree, this might not give you very much. Take a look at which one of these says ancestral gift. So this one, for example, that's why it's 11 out of 10. But this is not an ancestral gift. For some reason, it's an elemental gift, so it does not benefit from that legendary affix. Here's another one that benefits. This belt is a nice to have legendary affix. It just gives you some damage reduction essentially. And in the shoulders we have extra projectiles. That is only applicable if you're actually considering to run a projectile based primary or secondary skill slots. Otherwise, you don't need to worry about this affix. And my amulet is absolutely useless for the build. Don't even look at it. For the Ultimatum, we actually run Gold Find right now. But yeah, we don't really need the Ultimatum. It's not a build-defining item slot for us. And the runes are not too relevant either, honestly. We just get a little bit of crit and ancestral strike damage and with a very high uptime. I'll quickly hover over my items, but I want you to keep in mind, like I mentioned earlier, these are not optimized at all. I have a lot of aura effect that I don't need, a lot of area increased size and effect that I don't need, and I don't have enough damage over time on a lot of these item slots. Even some elemental % damage would be welcome for some of the alternative setups that I have. So here are the affixes that I have. This is a new one that I just set up recently. Max Ancestral Strike, Crit Strike with damage over time. All grafted in there. It's a crazy shoulder right here. Now let's quickly talk about attributes. Probably the most useful one here is % increased elemental damage and willpower. It also has increased ancestral strike damage, elemental pen, damage over time. Even the area increased size is not terrible. So I would recommend maxing this out. Then I also recommend getting this rank 45 in Zeal, because whenever you deal ancestral strike damage, you restore 5% of your max life. That is insane with this build. We're running so much life that 5% of our max life. As you can see, we're running 25% low life build essentially. So 5 ancestral strikes is a full heal for us. We also get 5% ancestral strike chance, 37.5 area damage reduction is nothing to scoff at as well. Here we just want the 10% crit chance, and then I dumped everything else in bravery. But honestly, depending on what you're running, depending on your setup, you could probably move a lot of points into bravery. In terms of heal, this 0 point is decent, but probably not mandatory, because we also have rejuvenation from our Slorm Reaper, and this is a 7-second heal. There is rejuvenation. You can see 750,000 life, our entire life pool over 7 seconds. And given that we're running low life, there's even greater benefit behind rejuvenation, and it's on a decently short cooldown. It doesn't cost much mana. It's the best heal to use out of everything that's available to us here. And finally, I'll touch on skills, because they're not as relevant as everything else that we went over. I do recommend going Phlegmatic Caster. The movement is nice, but I primarily pick it up because of the max life multiplier. 15% max life is 15% more damage, but also more evasion, more survivability, everything. Life is just so important for the build. Area increased effect is okay. 20% elemental damage is actually quite nice. And then, I don't know, these don't matter too much. This, again, irrelevant, 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 and this one is a solid crit damage boost. So I'm mostly running Phlegmatic Caster for the mobility behind Time Warp, the 15% max life multiplier, the crit damage, and a little bit of elemental percent increase. And then for skills, I would honestly say you can run almost whatever you want, as long as it does a little bit of elemental damage. What I've opted for is trying to play around temporal friction. And my next build, I'm just going to tell you right now, I think I'm going to try and min-max around Orb of the Arcane Master, Temporal Friction, and these procs in particular, because they do a lot of elemental damage. And it can scale with crit damage as well, not with Ancestral because it is an indirect damage, but it scales with the number of projectiles that we have of the Orb of the Arcane Master. And it scales with how often you can proc it, because it does not delete the orb once you've procced it once. The AoE is absolutely amazing, and you can get the cooldown of Orb of the Arcane Master to be quite low by combining a lot of these cooldown options. And for proccing this particular thing, you can see you can use Rift Nova. I have chosen indeed Rift Nova with some boosts to its area, as well as its damage as a function of its area. And then by proccing a second Rift Nova, that means we proc all of these explosions twice. That's why we choose Dependent Nova. The other option is to run Clone, but I'm already running a totem for Orb of the Arcane Master so that it can spam orbs for me, as you can see here. As this current Phlegmatic Caster setup, we can only have one totem, so it doesn't really make sense to pick this one. But yeah, that's about what we're getting out of Rift Nova. The other stuff is not too relevant. We just want two of them, and we want slightly larger area, and then a little bit extra damage doesn't hurt. So this Rift Nova Orb of the Arcane Master is something that I'm gonna try and min-max for my next build guide. I think there's a lot of potential there. But this is also why I'm running the Proj Legendary effect on the shoulders. Other reliable elemental damage options are Arcane Breach. You can run this and you can see the damage is decent once you optimize it properly. And yeah, I mean, really anything that has some elemental damage, even Book Smash has some elemental damage in it, you can make it work with this setup. We just have so much elemental damage that a lot of these, even though the numbers are not quite favorable, you can see the skill damage is 5x the elemental damage. It's absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, I will also put together a build planner where I'll highlight all of the affixes that I think are important. The only downside there is I can't highlight things like aura increased effect. You really want it, but only up to 50%. So hopefully you've watched that video and you can spot that important aspect. And now check out some additional Netherworld mapping with the single Gigaburn setup. This time I purposefully tried to avoid casting on my main skill and my secondary skill, just so you can see how smooth the clear can be. And by the way, I'm pretty sure I can 10x the damage if I fine-tune my items a bit more. The high-end DPS potential for this build is absolutely through the roof. And that is partially because we don't need to worry about survivability too much. With such a large life pool and so much recovery, we can focus most of our affixes on damage. And even when we do focus on survivability, that just entails stacking life, which gives us damage as well, and a lot of it. So seriously, you guys have to try this build out. And you don't need to run the build setup that I'm running. That's just something that scales really well with elemental damage. But there are so many other things that scale pretty well with elemental damage. Stuff like Thunder Strike procs, anything to do with the lightning side of the Ancestral skill tree, you could probably make it work. In fact, that gives me the idea to actually try that out on stream at some point. But yeah, the best part about this build is the flexibility. So I truly hope you give it a chance. And if you do, please let me know in the comments what worked well for you. How did it feel? Was the clear smooth? Was the single target smooth? Because I'm pretty sure there are a bunch of hidden gems that we can uncover with this crazy elemental damage and life stacking setup. And now I'm going to try and min-max around the Arcane Orb and Nova setup that I talked about a little bit earlier in the video. If you enjoyed the video and the build guide, let me know. Like, subscribe, join me on Twitch to see what else we can come up with. Thank you if you've made it this far. Take it easy and go chiso sama deshita.